Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to do a second album today, or maybe this is your first. They're both releasing at the same time. We checked out Cardiacs on Land and in the Sea. Here we have Loxandra Ensemble. In Transition is the title of the album. I don't know anything about this album. I don't know anything about this artist. The word ensemble makes me think we might be getting some classical in here. I don't know. Let's dive into it. Genius doesn't have anything for this group, so I don't have any additional context for it, and I'm going to assume there's no lyrics to this either. So, again, I'm kind of thinking we're getting some classical today. Let's dive in and see what Loxandra Ensemble is bringing to the table today. Also, a quick note is that I don't know the language most of these titles are in. It definitely looks like a Romance language to me, but I only know Spanish and doesn't look like Spanish, so I don't want to mispronounce anything. I'm just gonna, y'all can read the titles right here. I'm just gonna call them by their track names as we go through the album today. Alright, let's dive in. It's a very interesting timbre. It's plucked strings. Both of them are plucked strings, but I think only one's in the lute family. A ton of bass resonance. Yeah, see, that was like a harmonic. Definitely something in the lute family. Gorgeous harmonies. Beautiful timbres all around. Okay. Yeah, nice little ornamental ideas to wrap the phrase up. Dude, the influences are all over the place. This is wild. Tons of rhythmic ideas being the lead, main concepts. I'm still trying to figure out what that, I think it's a woodwind. It's squeaky like a clarinet could be, but I don't know. That's a violin. Or some other type of bowed string instrument. Beautiful. There's a lot of silence there. All right. Yeah, I probably should have taken a couple more notes than I only started to take notes right there at the end, and it's because it's just how can you how can you listen to this and not get immediately sucked into it? I think that's where I was at. Like, I don't know how critical of an analysis is going to be. A lot of that was just me enjoying a bunch of stuff I don't typically listen to. And maybe that's a good place to start, right? Not the fact that I don't listen to this often, but a lot of stuff that's a lot of stuff. I think that's a good way to go into. There's a lot of influences in here. I think that's what stands out to me the most. There is some Indian elements in here, but there's also like Middle Eastern components. I don't know. There's Latin rhythms in here. I mean, it's quite possible that maybe these rhythms are also prevalent in other cultures' music as well. But that ta 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 ta, that's a cornerstone of man, what is that style of music? Reggaeton. Um, Also the instruments in here, I'm not entirely sure what they are. They're certainly within families I'm familiar with. We have string instruments, we have percussion instruments, we have woodwind instruments. The strings, we have bowed instruments, something that sounds like a violin. We also have something in the lute family, which would be like a guitar type instrument. Um, I don't know. There's something that reminds me of. Is it called a zither? I'm trying to remember the name of the Japanese instruments that I'm thinking of though. That's it. Definitely not called a zither, but I think a zither's in the same family. Anyways, it's just a bunch of strings. Anywhere from like 10 to 20 or 30, just on a really long board, sort of like a harp. But instead of upright in front of you, it's laid down on like a table. It's parallel with the ground. I think we heard one of those though. Plucked string that you don't alter the pitch by shortening the string length like you would on a guitar, where you want to make a higher note, you just hold down the string at something closer to the bridge. This one, if you want a different note, you just play a different string. They have a different string for every note. I can't think of what instrument that would be though, or even what the general family name is of that. There's a lot of really cool percussion in here though. And it's not even just the instrumentation and timbre of it. Like I said, there's harmonic elements, there's rhythmic elements, there's melodic elements that come from a bunch of different cultures as well. It's a melting pot of a lot of folk music all tossed together, and at least to my ears, presented in a way that is popish. I don't know if that's really the right word for it. It I think that this has mainstream adjacent appeal in that I don't necessarily know that you could put this on, a radio and it break, top 40 or something like that. But I do think that if you gave this to a general audience, they would be receptive to it in some capacity. A lot more so than if you took, traditional folk music and played it for them. I think some people might find it palatable, but it certainly would not be something they seek out. But I think between the way that the vocals are delivered, some of the melodic ideas crafted for the vocals, the general flow and structure of the track, and the I don't know a good way to phrase this. An apparent or maybe surface level simplicity to everything. There is depth if you want to get into it, but it is something that on the surface is simple enough for a general audience to enjoy. It creates something that feels like it's at least folk music produced through a pop lens, or again, a pop adjacent lens. And I find this whole thing to be, and pop too is that's also going to be culture based, right? I'm primarily coming at it from a Western, particularly American viewpoint of pop, but it's quite possible that wherever they come from, maybe it is close to their culture's pop music. A lot closer than I think American pop music, but again, it still has a lot of qualities that I think would fit well with a mainstream audience. It's just really fascinating. It seems that they've taken a lot of their a lot of culture's sounds and made them digestible for a modern audience. I think that's where I'm kind of going with all this, and I find that very admirable, but also it is a massive undertaking to present something to a modern audience that is much, much older than most people would be listening to it. But on top of that, it still feels like it honors the music that they're borrowing these influences from. It still honors the cultures. So, where do we go from here? Because it's like a big overview of what we just listened to. Let's talk about some more in-depth things. And I'm going to look for lyrics. Like I said, Genius didn't have any originally, but when I will take a break to look for lyrics, see if I can't find them anywhere else on the internet. I will also take a moment to look them up and figure out instrument list, possibly, and some other stuff. I'm kind of curious where they come from, to what country they're from. So I'm going to do a little bit of investigation into them during that break, and worst case scenario, if I don't find any lyrics, we'll still have a discussion about some of that. About the song itself. So, we have an intro, which is very harmonic based. It focuses on note relationships, note intervals, chords. We do have some melodic movement to it, but I feel like that's more of just giving it direction and energy, pushing into the main section, which is like the middle, I don't know, 3.5 minutes of this track. And then we have the outro, which is instrumental. It's quieter, there's less layers, and again, primarily focused on harmony, though there are melodic qualities to it. The intro and the outro aside, I want to focus on the core part of the song here in the middle. First part about it is there's a lot of repetition in the foundation, while the melodic part, specifically looking at the vocal melody, at least to me, feels completely linear. It's quite possible that there is some sort of cyclical structure to it. I didn't pick up on any of that. I know that some of how I view structure from vocal delivery, vocal performances, is through words. When I hear repeated phrases or repeated lines, I typically say, oh, this is probably the chorus. I don't have that opportunity here, so I have a little bit less information while listening to this. And given how repetitive some of the, actually, not a lot of the foundational elements are, which we will get into in a second, I have a very hard time knowing what exactly the structure is on this track. Part of the song is just a really long A section. I listen to the lyrics though, or the vocal element to it, and it feels completely linear. The rhythms, I think, are consistently changing. There weren't any licks or ostinatos or riffs, whatever you want to call them, any looped elements of the vocal line that I immediately picked up on and say, oh, I've heard that before. And so it feels to me like it's a linear track. Instead of one long A section, we have A and then B and then C and then D or whatever, how many sections are in the track. And from that perspective, I don't actually know what the structure of the song is. It'll be really interesting to dive into the lyrics there and see if the lyrics, or the person who wrote the lyrics down, denotes, verse, chorus kind of idea, bridge in the text itself. That would really help me understand the structure of what's going on here. Now, I mentioned that section was going to be about the foundation, and it ended up being about structure. The foundation is very repetitive. If you listen to the percussive section, you listen to the percussion section, you listen to the bass instrument. I don't know what instrument it is. It's a very wide resonant tone. It's just boom. It's just this really deep, big sound. Um, I can't wait to find out what instrument that is. It is just so nice. It is a beautiful bass tone. But when you listen to that, you listen to the percussion. Um, there's just a lot of repetition. When we start the song to when we end the song, there's very little change throughout that. There are minor moments of variation. There are times when some things will jump in and provide some punctuating ideas. It's not 100% identical from start to finish, but there's not a lot of change in there, which makes sense given some of the influences in here. Folk music, in general, across a lot of cultures, tends to be very repetitive as far as foundation goes. But even beyond that, the cultures present in here, such as particularly the Indian influence and even a little bit of the Middle Eastern influence, tend to have a lot of repetition in their foundational elements of their folk music too. So it's not just the song is doing this because it wants to, it's also incorporating parts of those cultural musical ideas into this song. I don't know if it would surprise me if any of the tracks ended up having some foundational variation across them, but I am expecting the music, if they continue in this vein, to continue to explore this idea of having a foundational floor that doesn't change, with the melody on top of it being what alters over time. If y'all remember, we checked out an Indian raga last month before. It wasn't that long ago. I'm pretty sure it was this year. Um, and it was sort of the same thing, right? This is something that's sort of baked into the folk music. It's not ever present, but it is present enough that I associate it as a core element of the culture's music. Um, and it's present here as well, just having that stationary foundation for the melody to have alterations and variations and changes. The melody ends up being a bit linear, the underlying parts are repetitive. That's how the music is built. So I find it cool that it's present here as well. Even if it isn't always my favorite kind of writing, I tend to like a bit more contrast. I think I'm okay with it here, especially as the songs are a bit on the shorter side. I'm a little bit worried that the 3 songs that approach the 6 minute mark, a couple are just over 6 minutes. I kind of hope that they have a little bit more variety to them, just on a personal, subjective level of my enjoyment of the music. But the 3.5 minute ish section that we had here was a fine length for it. And I found that many of the elements that sat above the foundational elements were interesting enough to keep my attention despite the repetition in the foundation. Now, when it comes to everything else, we have a lot of instruments that aren't rhythmic or foundational in that they're giving us chordal ideas. A lot of this is harmonic, sorry, take that back. A lot of it is melodic ideas, such as the vocals giving us the lead melody, or ornamental ideas like the final punctuation on many of the phrases, where the vocalist will end their line, and then a few of the melodic instruments will play a little 2 or 3 beat phrase to wrap it up before we start back over with something new following that same pattern. This was present through most of the track, and I just have to keep in mind about where the influences are, because it makes 100% sense that that is how the song ended up being written given the influences, but I would have liked a little bit more play between the instruments and the vocals. I know this is a very Western oriented criticism, and I also appreciate that it is a subjective one. I don't think it would necessarily improve the song in any objective quantity, but I do like instruments, especially melodic instruments, having a bit of the spotlight, and I thought it would have been really cool to have some back and forth, call and response, counterpoint, any of these very Western classical ideas being present in the music. And again, it doesn't fit the influences of the music at all. So I appreciate that it would probably not be better for everyone, or even better objectively, but I thought it would have been neat. Regardless, what the band did do is really cool, and I do like what's going on. The melodies are beautiful, the ornamental bits are beautiful, everything works together to push the song forward in a way that keeps the energy positive, upbeat, and very likable. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a strong palatability to this song that I do think works well with a modern audience, despite where the influences come from. Um, and I guess speaking about that feeling, that vibe, right? I did say positive and upbeat, and I do feel like that is generally accurate for this song, but that's not to say that this track is consistently positive, where every single chord or harmonic element of the song is positive, where there's no instability to the chord, there is no dissonance introduced at all. There are some, in Western music at least, we would call them spicy chords going on in here. To use a very technical term. But yeah, there's a few chordal ideas in here that you just don't hear too often in Western music that definitely gives it that Middle Eastern flair at times. I really appreciate it. I love the sounds. Phrygian. I don't know why I almost blanked out on that. It's Phrygian mode scales that we hear throughout this. I love Phrygian. It's beautiful. Phrygian dominant is also really gorgeous. I don't think we heard any of that in here, but we do get a little bit of those popping up here and there. It creates that very specific Middle Eastern vibe when you hear that chord. It's been used in a lot of pop culture media over the years. It also shows up in a lot of their culture. It's not like it was a stereotypical thing. Um, but it is, if I play that chord, the first thing most people are going to think is the Middle East. So we do hear a little bit of that in here, but it's really cool because it's not exclusive. It's a harmonic device that's included amongst a series of other harmonic devices. Once again, it's a big smorgasbord, a melting pot of ideas. And so it's really hard to track down where all the influences are harmonically. But it also makes it, at least for me, a little difficult to figure out the story of the harmony. The vibe in here is generally positive, but not always positive. But it's always done so in a way that is a bit divorced from my experience with a lot of Western music. And so I don't quite have a strong enough relationship to these sounds to understand the nuance of them in a way that I could say, oh, this series of chords is imitating or reflecting or creating a musical metaphor for these emotions right here, and that could be interpreted as this type of narrative. That's, I mean, I kind of hate sitting up here and saying, oh, I don't have the insight I usually have with this stuff. But there's a lot of shorthand that goes into it. I have a lot of experience with music based on Western chord theory. When I get outside of that, I don't have that shorthand anymore, and it takes a little bit more time to pick up on stuff. I'm hoping, much like the Cardiacs video that also released today, maybe after we get 7 or 8 tracks into this, I begin to unlock some of the puzzle that I couldn't at the beginning. And if you go back and check out that Cardiacs video, you'll notice that in an interesting inversion, usually the front end of my album reactions are very analysis heavy, and the analysis dwindles a bit as we get through the album, as I have less and less unique things to say about the songs, as bands typically write songs that are generally similar to each other. It's very unusual for an album to come out where every song is totally different and I have nothing identical to say about any of them. And so I would have, 30 minutes of unique thoughts after each track or something like that. But with Cardiacs, I feel like the analysis was more heavily weighted towards the end as I began to understand what they were doing. It took it took extra time for understanding. And I'm hoping that that's what happens here. With all of that said, I don't think I had anything else I want to bring up except layers, but I'm pretty sure layers are going to pop up in the next track too, so I don't want to make this one too weighty. I'll talk about layers next time. Let's see if I can find some lyrics on this. Alright, so first of all, I did find some lyrics that I think are. Here's the thing, they're not lyrics for this band. However, it appears that this band often plays folk music, and I did find the lyrics to the Greek folk track with this, or the Greek folk song with the same name. It translates to "Why Does It Matter to You?" It's a song about asking why people care about where people come from. It starts off, says, "Why does it matter to you where I came from? From Karantashi, my light, or from Cardelio? Why does it matter to you that you always ask me from which village I come, since you don't love me?" This is pretty much the idea for most of it. Every stanza starts off with, "Why does it matter that you always ask?" and then mention something about it. The idea being that if you don't even like me based off of something so arbitrary as where I was born, or even something else is, I think race comes up at one time. The idea basically is that you're not going to treat me like a human anyways. Why does it matter where I come from? You already don't. It says, at one point, it even says, "Why does it matter that you always ask me, since you do not feel sorry for me and you torment me?" Yeah, there's this idea of hatred based off of external factors here. Why do you care where I come from at all if you don't embrace me for who I am anyways? That's pretty much what the song comes down to. So I find this interesting. Not just not the song itself, which I mean it's a really good message though. I think that's awesome. It feels still applicable today, and I'm kind of curious when it came out, when it was written or created. There's a video at least of somebody singing it from 1927. I say video, but it's probably just audio with a picture of the person maybe. So it's at least 100 years old, almost. Maybe more. But what I find interesting is that this group does cover older music. It isn't just taking the influences from their culture's folk music, but also taking some of those songs and modernizing them. So I did find a couple of pages about them. I found something on daletmusic.com regarding them, and I found their official YouTube page, which has a bit of a description there. It does mix a lot of stuff. They specifically talk about urban musical traditions of the Greek people of Istanbul and Smyrna. Talks about Greek folk and traditional music, and mixing all of that with classic Ottoman music, the Oriental sounds of the Arabic East, the Sephardic music, and the music of the Balkans. So certainly bringing in a bit of an Eastern European and Middle Eastern group, and just kind of big old mixing pot there. Interestingly, I don't see anything in here about Indian music, which I felt there's a lot of influence in here. But it's quite possible that some of these styles that I don't have any experience with might do things that are similar-ish to some of the Indian folk music, and maybe where I thought I heard Indian influence was actually one of these other ones, if I just knew about them. I also found some information about instrumentation. There's a lot less in here than I thought, although there is percussion, which I'm sure takes up quite a bit. There's a lot of percussion in that last section, that last song we checked out. But we have two percussionists. Doesn't list what instruments they play, but I suppose we'll talk about that after the next track. There's a lot of hand drums, though. That's all I'm going to say for right now, especially since the song is starting to drift out of my memory. I don't want to talk about any specifics since I might not be remembering it correctly. We also have a clarinetist, which I mentioned. I'm actually surprised it is a clarinet. But I I heard something in the woodwind family. We have a violin, which I called out. We also have a vocalist. We have two vocalists, a male and a female, it looks like. The male vocalist also does bass. It just says bass, which makes me think guitar, and at this point there's a lot more Western instruments than I was expecting in this group. Though the percussion to me still sounds mostly non-Western, so that's that. But there are two instruments that stand out here, the qanun and the oud. I feel like we've seen the qanun before. The oud is a lute instrument, though. Oh, okay. So, give me 1 second to make sure that all this is gonna look nice. Alright, so this is the qanun. And, as I mentioned, I remembered, I mentioned that I heard an instrument that was plucked string, but one where it was a series of strings. This wasn't the instrument I was thinking of. I don't know that I know have we checked out a qanun before? I don't know. The word feels kind of familiar to say, but it's not one I'm particularly familiar with, I don't think. But I had the right family down. And then the oud it's a lute instrument. It's like a guitar, right? Just a little bit different. Different body, different timbre, different resonance, different strings, all sorts of stuff. There's a lot of strings on that, by the way. It looks like 12 strings. So, oh yeah, it even says that it's a chordophone lute plucked unfretted. So, chordophone. I don't think I'd know that phrase. Because it would be in the classical representation would be an idiophone, which means that it's struck with vibrations to create sound. I don't think I've heard the term chordophone before, though. I gotta look that up later and see what that means. So yeah, we have a lot of Western instruments, and then the oud and the qanun, which are definitely giving it a little bit more of that Middle Eastern flair, but also, the oud this one says it's Turkish. I'm curious. You see, it's a Middle Eastern short neck lute type, pear-shaped, fretless stringed instrument. A chordophone, string instruments. Oh, instruments are just called chordophones, musical instruments that produce sound from vibrating strings. Did I have that backwards then? What is an idiophone? Should I be doing this? Okay, so chordophones are a type of idiophone. Okay, there's a lot of different ways to classify instruments. And so there's definitely going to be some overlap on some of this stuff. Anyways, let's get back on track here. Just went on a strange tangent into musical vocabulary. Let's push forward into this next track called Longa Bambino. See what's going on with this. Love the harmony on that melody line. The slide into that. The playfulness of that call and response. Lovely. Lovely stuff. And also you'll notice we've gone through 3 sections now and the percussion really hasn't changed much. Pretty sure that's just going to be the way it is on this album, and that makes sense given the influences. Ooh. Really digging this rhythm here. It's such a cheeky little line and I love it. Getting a lot of rhythmic complexity here just from all the layers. Just the way it slides into those notes. Love it. Interesting new time feel here. Gorgeous. I expect nothing less from them. This was a wonderful second track, primarily because it is very different from the first. I mentioned that they do cover some folk tracks, folk songs. I gotta stop calling them tracks. They do cover folk songs like we had previously, and that explains some of the more simplistic writing within that song. This is the opposite of that. I think this is an original work by them, and through that lens, it is more varied and explores different types of composition than we would normally find in folk music from most cultures. Folk music tends to be a lot simpler than the music that came out after it. Even when we look at, no, it's not necessary to go into. Folk music tends to be easier. That's good enough right there. And so we come to this track though, and it's complex in a lot of ways. I mean, first of all, right off the bat, we had call and response, we had interesting harmonies, we had counterpoints. Everything I asked for from our first track showed up here. Yeah, I love it. It's more of the music that I would love to hear from them. And that's not to say I didn't like the first track either. You know, as I mentioned, it's a solid track. It is gorgeous. I enjoyed it. It's just casually I like a little bit more contrast to the work, and this song brings that entirely. And I really hope this album can balance that well. Um, Finding ways of bringing traditional folk music into the modern day with their reimaginings of them and utilizing their influences to build songs to create modern folk. Is that a thing? It should be, because I think they're nailing it and I love it. And so through that lens, we get a song that has more melodic complexity to it, and it fits the idea of modern music, I think, a bit better. And it's very cool to see them exploring this side. I think they could very easily just make full albums of, folk covers, and that would still be awesome. And here they just took the extra steps of what if we made our own track? Um, and I'm supporting that every day. I love the balance between these two songs. I think it's a fantastic way to kick this album off. Showcase both sides of the band. Maybe there's more sides. You know, maybe we get to track three. I'm like, oh, it's a totally different side of them. But right here, I see the two sides of emulating traditional folk music in and changing small things to make it modern, and making new folk music based off of modern advancements in compositional techniques. And I think that's awesome. Now, this song also does other stuff to make it more complex and deeper, though. And of course, we have a structure here that isn't just a long A section. And, I forgot to talk about this too, but when we did the lyrics to track one, there is a general flow to it. I think there is a bit of a cycle. As I mentioned, many of the stanzas are sort of identical. It takes that folk idea of just having a lot of A sections to it, something you can find even in Americana. Um, but there is a chorus, there is a stanza in there that differentiates from everything else, and kind of does its own thing. So I would probably put that first track in the structure of A A B A B. Much like a lot of folk music, just bouncing between two ideas. In this case, they're just very similar musically. For this song, though, it's completely linear, though it does have callbacks, which is very cool. We have our introductory section, which lasts for quite a while, and then we have our slowed down moment, and then we have the outro, which recalls sections from earlier without bringing back the first section entirely. So we have an ABC structure here. Um, and that allows the song to have dynamic elements to the track that we didn't hear in the first track. The dynamic elements of layering, depth, complexity, and volume and tempo are all present in this song, and I love the use of all of it. It really allows that second section when we rein everything in and we reduce the number of instruments and we slow everything down and we make it just a hair bit quieter, to really stand out. We've only listened to 10 minutes of music here, and that moment really stood out to me. Everything else feels similar-ish. Not saying it's all the same, and certainly even the opening of this track is very different from everything we heard on the last track. Um, but it creates a bit of a contrast point. It adds dynamics to the album that I wasn't sure we were going to get, and I'm really glad that we did here. And I'm sure going forward we're going to hear more contrasting elements, more dynamic writing. But here, 10 minutes into the album, like, yeah, that tells me we're in for a good time. Um, yeah, dynamics, contrast, groove. This is something I really didn't bring up too much on the first one because it kind of ties into layers. There's a lot of layers going on in this music. Sometimes it's just multiple harmonic ideas. multiple instruments all leaning into the harmonic structure, note intervals, note distances, stuff like that to create the specific emotional atmospheres that we get from the chords and their progressions. We also have, in the case of this track, Longa Bambino, a lot of melodic ideas, back and forths, counterpoint, two melodies going off at the same time. Really cool stuff, creating density on the melodic range. But when we pull this back to the rhythmic section, the rhythm section, I don't know, that's the second time I've said that. Rhythmic section. When we pull it back to the rhythm section, we find a ton of density here. And I find this to be fascinating because it isn't just found in the percussion instruments. But I'm going to get to that in a second. We have two percussionists. That right there should tell you have a lot of rhythmic stuff going on. The cool thing is that they tend to be pushed out to either side of the mix. So if you only want to focus on what one percussionist is doing, it's very easy to do that. It's actually a really nice balance overall, just from a casual perspective, but from a critical perspective, it's so good. It allows me to just have this clarity of what instruments are doing what, especially since I don't have a lot of familiarity with the timbres of these percussion instruments, and so I find it more difficult to pinpoint exactly who's doing what or stuff like that. If they were all coming from center channel where production tends to get produced, I think I would just kind of confuse it all into like the auxiliary percussion of the song, and I wouldn't be able to have any of this insight. What's really cool though, a lot of it sounds like hand drums to me. Whether it's just a really a long drum with like usually a wooden drum head on top you hit with your hands, or like bongos, or I'm not saying they have bongos because that's probably from the wrong culture, but I'm saying hand drums like that. We have a few of those. We also have, and I always forget the name of this, and it's a box. It's a hollow box you hit. Every single time this instrument comes up. When I look, oh, there were no lyrics on this, were there? I hear some of that in here, though. There are some things in here that emulate. I don't even know. Symbols. How? Oh, how do you pronounce that? Cajon? Cajon? Originally from Peru. Oh, there's also African slit drums. Those aren't played by hand, though. I wonder if there is a Middle Eastern version of the cajon. Anyways, I don't really need to show a picture. It's literally just a wooden box. You usually sit on, and you put your hands between your legs, and you spread your legs out so you can reach the box, and you just hit it. It has a very unique timbre to it. Yeah, these slit drums are pretty cool, though, but I don't think they were in here. Yeah, these are African and East Asian. Does not look like any of the places they have influence would have had anything similar to this. Very cool. I gotta look that up, though. Maybe I'll find some music with slit drums in it later to check out. Where was I going with all this? Oh yeah, percussion. There's a lot of these very hollow types of hand drum style sounds coming out of this. But then we also have something that sounded like the cymbals. I don't know what those are. They weren't cymbals, I'll tell you that. The timbre, the way that they shimmered, the reverb off them, all that was totally different than a typical Western drum kit cymbal, or even like a classical orchestral cymbal. But I don't know. I don't know what I wish. I wish I could find an instrument list for the percussionists for this group, because I think that's where I'm most intrigued by it. The oud and the qanun. We've seen them before. I'm still not 100% sure about the qanun, but I think we've seen that before. Definitely talked about the oud during another song from some other group. I don't remember where that would have come up. Oh, I can't think of her name. There is an artist who did an album recently called Metal Goes Egyptian. And I think the oud showed up in one of those songs. I can't for the life of me remember that artist's name, though. I feel bad about that. But I think they also had a Kanoon in that live recording session, too. Maybe we did talk about both then. But percussion, this I think is where I might find some new instruments. And especially that, what is that symbol? That's kind of my big question there. Anyways, though, there's a lot of this going on. And so we have rhythms coming out of both sides of speakers, and they are getting lined up in ways that create these complex rhythmic elements, which I think is very cool. It introduces a lot of syncopation against the two rhythmic ideas without creating something that is too complex where it falls apart. It finds this nice middle ground between rhythmic syncopation and groove and simplicity. And what that ends up creating is just really infectious ideas. I find it really difficult to listen to either of these songs and not move my body along to them. And I think 100% of that comes from the percussion instruments. Now, as I mentioned, what feels like a lifetime ago, because I went on like 2 tangents there, the rhythmic elements of these tracks aren't perpetuated simply by the percussion instruments. There are usually some kind of instruments. Honestly, I think it's the oud often that utilizes, I think, muting on the strings in order to create a percussive sound that does have a pitch associated with it. So it is melodic in some quantities, occasionally also working with harmony, as I do think chords are being played from time to time, but it does create rhythmic ideas because of the muting and the percussive sound of playing muted strings. And these tend to work sometimes in parallel with one of the percussionists, where they're playing the same rhythm alongside, but frequently I'm also finding that there's a third set of polyrhythmic ideas being introduced, and it's usually not for an elongated amount of time. The percussionists are playing rhythm all the time, every beat consistently. This would be more like adding a little bit of extra rhythmic spice for 2 beats every other bar or something like that, every 4 bars. It's a rhythmic ornamentation, if you will, and I find it really interesting to hear them because they don't mess anything up. It doesn't muddy the rhythmic waters. It's always complementary in a way, even if it isn't running parallel with what somebody else is doing. There's a lot of consideration put into place, knowing that there is a lot of rhythmic information being presented, and ensuring that it isn't rhythmic overload for the listener while still adding that depth and complexity. It is absolutely gorgeous to hear them continue to write these interesting rhythmic parts, even though, for the most part, the rhythms don't change much. I find that really fascinating. Is there anything else I wanted to bring up for this? Layers, counterpoint, groove. I guess just the general melody here. We didn't have the vocals here, which allowed the instruments to take the spotlight, which I'm really happy about. I think I mentioned that during the first one too. Alongside my idea of wanting counterpoint was a little bit of time for the instruments to shine, and we got a lot of time for the instruments to shine, and I love that. It feels like every instrument got a little bit of spotlight doing some lead melody. We certainly had clarinet, we had violin, we had the oud, right? Take spotlight for a second. I don't remember if the Kanoon did spotlight. I don't remember. Well, if nothing else, 75% of the melodic instruments had a chance to play a lead melody in here, and I think that works really well. We also had that really cheeky call and response idea in here that showed up a couple of times. I like that as a sort of motif existing through this, that no matter how far we get away from that home idea that we started the track off with, that we always came back to that. And it was a nice little through line through the entire track that kept everything feeling like it was working towards a unified vision, always pushing towards something new, but keeping where it came from in mind, and allowing the song to feel both linear and cyclically cohesive simultaneously. All right, let's push forward. Once again, I'm going to choose to elect not to say the titles of these. I think the next one I will say the title of, though, is 10, because that's Balkan Salsa. That's just 2 words, I know. Everything between here and there, though, I'm going to assume is in Greek, and yeah, I'm not going to try to pronounce some of these, or any of these. We'll just let the text do that for me. All right, let's keep going, see what's going on with this third one. See, that's like a hi-hat. That's 2 cymbals hitting each other. But it doesn't sound like a Western hi-hat. It's brighter, tinnier. I would love to see the percussion instrument, even if I don't have a name for them. I want to see what they're using. The way the 2-string instruments, yeah.
Και τι δεν κάνω, την παγωμένη σου καρδιά για να ζεστάνω. Εσύ μου δίνεις και μια πίκρα παραπάνω για πληρωμή. Αμαρτία μεγάλη, μια καρδιά που για σένα λακταράει και πεθαίνει. Να τη βλέπεις σαν ξένη. Και τι δεν κάνω για να βρεθώ στην αγκαλιά σου. Τι δεν κάνω και μ' αποφεύγεις σαν αλήτη, σαν ζητιάνο κάθε στιγμή.
Yeah, the strings coming together here, the pluck strings, in order to create this rhythmic element under the beautiful legato violin playing. Minor sforzandos coming out of the violins.
Παγωμένη σου καρδιά για να ζεστάνω. Εσύ μου δίνεις και μια πίκρα παραπάνω για πληρωμή. Αμαρτία μεγάλη, μια καρδιά που για σένα λακταράει και πεθαίνει.
That offbeat, muted guitar idea reminds me so much of, reggae.
Και τι δεν κάνω για να βρεθώ στην αγκαλιά σου. Τι δεν κάνω και μ' αποφεύγεις σαν αλήτη, σαν ζητιάνο κάθε στιγμή.
That was an interesting ending. It just sort of petered out. We were doing one thing, and then a little bit of a lackluster chordal resolution from one instrument that was quite a bit quieter than everything else, and it just called it a day. I was kind of expecting it to go into the next track, how close we were to the ending, and the fact that they typically have like 6 to 10 seconds of silence at the end of these songs. I was like, we're getting really close to the end of this, and it doesn't feel like the song has room to end. The one thing I really want to two things. One of them is more of a general observation. One is about this specific track. We'll start with that one. There is a amorphous smokiness to this song. Part of it is just from the overall vibe, the general atmosphere of the track. It it generally feels like, I don't know, a mirage, if that makes any sense. There's something about it that feels like if I reached out and could grab music, my hand would still go through it. It's a specific atmosphere that's crafted probably through the use of chords and probably some compositional. Yeah, that's real good observation, man. This music does stuff with the way they wrote it. Maybe I'm not verbalizing myself great on this concept, and maybe that I don't know that I can. Does anybody else get that feeling though? It feels very smoky. I mean, maybe another word would be nah. I don't know. It just feels amorphous. It feels like the song is an illusion, and I love it. Like the chords lean into that. Um, And there's just like a hazy atmosphere to it. But the thing is, like when I think about individual string lines, particularly the pluck strings, there is a real strong sense of presence to them. So individually, I won't say that the song is consistently ethereal throughout. It's just that when everything comes together, I kind of get that vibe. Um, so here's something I noticed. And get to something I can articulate on. Playing the right notes right. This is something I bring up often whenever we have non-distorted instrumentation. I feel like I bring it up every time, but I think this is one of the few times I've brought it up outside of classical music, and I think that's just due to circumstance, because this is one of the few times we have acoustic instruments here. It's really important in some music to play the right notes correctly. And this is one of those situations. It's not about just playing the right pitch, but how do you play it? I mentioned that there are some sforzando ideas going on with the violins. That's when you hit a note at a specific volume, immediately drop your volume, and crescendo back into that initial one. Something like a very drastic example would be ba. You start off with a heavy accent, bring it down, grow back into it. We heard a lot of that on a much more nuanced scale. The violins would hit the note, drop down just a hair, and come back in. It almost feels like a bit of a volume-based vibrato, except the notes were a bit longer, and that means that the shifting of this volumetric dynamic element isn't consistent. Vibrato is consistent. It's an equidistant up and down. But this high, low, high, low, high, and then you stay on the high for a little bit, just because they're holding the note out. So which makes it feel more like a sforzando other than a consistent effect being put on the entire performance. Is very neat. Another thing I think also coming from the violins is a lot of the notes in here, and I pointed it out, I think on track 2, it might have been track 1, the way that the violin slides into notes. Another term for it could be slurring into notes, however you want to read into it. We're going to stick with slides because it is a string instrument, and that's a terminology used for guitars. Slurring is typically what we would call it for wind instruments. But it almost feels like many of the notes are starting a half step or maybe even a whole step at times under the intended or target note. You hit it and then you quickly move into it. So you get ba ba ba, and it has these little dips into each of the notes. And we hear this all the time in this track, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. I love it. We also, like I said, we also heard another track, and I pointed out there too. I just didn't get a chance to talk about it, but it's one of those cases where maybe the melody would work just fine if you just played those target pitches. I would probably be none the wiser. if I heard that version, I'm like, yeah, it still sounds great. This is beautiful. But knowing that they decided to go the extra mile and put these little dips, these little slurs into it, the slides, it just gives it that right amount of energy. But I thinking about it now, that's sort of that amorphousness, isn't it? The pitch that is intended isn't the one that takes up the majority of the note. Yeah, you get the perception of that intended note, but a majority of the sound is actually the movement into it. What you're trying to get isn't always there. I don't know if that really adds to it or not, but I think it works. But we actually hear a lot of that. I mean, what's another instrument? Oh, even talking about the rhythmic elements of the oud and the muted playing from the last time from Longa Bambino. There's a lot of instruments here. The percussion definitely feels a bit more straightforward. You just hit the drum. But I'd say that all of the string instruments have this element of playing the right notes right. Except the bass. The bass is also another straightforward one. I don't think I've heard any interesting or unusual performative elements to it. It's just playing the note, and it's just it. But see, that's the bass though. The bass and the percussion are the rhythm section. They hold everything together. They're the glue that keeps everything going forward. So it makes sense that they're a little bit less fancy in their performance since they are the foundation of the band. They have to be solid. They can't be intricate. And I'd like to hear a little bit of that inversion somewhere in this album just to see what the bassist can do, but I do not expect it as it sort of goes against what I've come to understand the band creates in just these 3 tracks so far. Um, was there anything? I don't think there's anything else I wanted to bring up. Other than just a continuation of many of my ideas, we actually got a really cool combination of the what I think is original writing from track 2 with a folk cover of track 1. It introduced something that feels closer to track 1's composition, a bit more straightforward, but does include some of the more interesting compositional ideas, such as call and response and counterpoint that we had from track 2, and sort of merge these together. I'm curious if this is another traditional folk song or if this is an original composition by them, because it also answers a question that I hadn't really posed yet, but I suppose I am curious about if they are mixing original works with covers. Do they ever write original lyrics, or is that going to be a giveaway? If the vocalist is singing, then it's a folk cover. I think what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to see if I can't find any information about how they go about making their songs. If these are indeed original or if they are all folk covers. Maybe just the opening track was a folk cover, nothing else is. Because right now I'm just going based off of hypothesis. I don't know. Other than that, I'm clear the first track, I'm like 90% clear. It's a cover. I probably could go back and listen to it again and check the syllables against the folk song lyrics that I pulled up. That'd be the only way to particularly know, definitively know, I should say. But everything else, it'd be nice to know going forward what they're how they operate. So let me just do a little bit of digging into all that. Alright, unfortunately, I can't find any information about the specific percussion instruments, so unless I hear something unique down the line, which I don't think I'm going to, I think that's going to be the end of the percussion conversation. On to the lyrics. This is an interesting track. First of all, again, I couldn't find lyrics directly prescribed to them, but I did find a song with the same title sung by other people of Greek culture who both of those songs also have the same lyrics. So I'm assuming that this is once again a folk song, possibly. There's 4 stanzas here. They're all very similar. Basically says that I would do anything for you, but you won't do anything for me. The first stanza says, and what I wouldn't do to sweeten your bitter life, and yet you give me even more bitterness every moment. What I wouldn't do to warm your frozen heart, and yet you give me more bitterness as payment. It's a great sin for a heart that yearns and dies for you, and you see me as a stranger. What I wouldn't do to be in your arms, you avoid me like a vagabond, like a beggar, every moment. It is a drastic shift from what I picked up on in the music, which I found to be more ethereal. This is very blunt. This is not enigmatic at all. It's not hidden or obfuscated. There is a lot of animosity or sadness even in this lyrics that I didn't really pick up on in the music, though again this could be my lacking of familiarity with the harmonic devices utilized in these cultures. Once again, as I said earlier, I use a lot of shorthand regarding Western music, and I have a lot of familiarity with what types of chords get utilized to express specific emotions, and it could just be different in the cultures that the influences from this album are. I don't think that made a lot of sense, but I hope you understood the gist of it. Let's push forward with the next track and see what's going on. So we have a drone and another melody line that's dancing around that drone. Those were very fun. The walk down and the rise up. Very interesting note choices. There's some sort of tambourine as well. The slight bends. It's interesting to notice in that last section that as fast as it was moving melodically, it was even faster rhythmically, with many of the notes being played twice. this song just took on a very brighter feeling. Yeah, I like their endings. They do a really great job of moving into them. Presenting the harmonic release, hitting that resolution. Ooh, whoa, what? Dude, that's funky. What in the world? This is fun. Okay, I'm here for this. Okay, we got some jazz in here. That fast walking bass, that's a very fast swing. This is wonderful. Boy, where has this been all my life? Yeah, the little ornamental ideas. Dude, it has like, it's not even just one type of jazz either. That's the wild thing. There's a little bit of lounge in here. A hair bit of something country lit ragtime maybe? Bluegrass? I don't know. Getting some variation in that little bass line. Some funky syncopation.
Σου πρέπουν τα σεγούνια. Καραγούνα, καραγούνα, δε σου πρέπουν τα σεγούνια. Καραγούνα, άιντε καραγούνα, σε να πρέπουν τα σεγούνια.
Dude, these funky hand drum rhythms against the jazzy drum kit drumming is super slick. Yeah, have fun with the ending. Yeah, okay. Karagouna, that is easily my favorite track on the album so far. They're just having fun with it, man. This is so good. And the thing is, too, man, like I said, it's a smashing together of so much stuff. Yeah, this is like predominantly jazz. There's a very strong jazz backbone to this track, but still, it's not the only flavor in the pot. I'm mixing my metaphors real hard. Stick with me here. We got jazz drumming, we got walking bass lines, right? Very jazz. We have this lounge style vocal stuff going on. Toward the end, though, we bring in some of those nice Middle Eastern rhythms in the auxiliary percussion, though. The violin line and um, the qanun line that we had in the solo sections were not really jazzy. They were jazz adjacent, but again, bringing in other influences to sit into the melodic writing. I don't know if they were improvised or not. Doesn't really matter to me. They were beautiful. I love the way that they crafted their story. A lot of it was faster, but I feel like this is a faster track. I think the tracks made me faster. Am I talking too fast? I don't think I was talking like this. Let me slow down a little bit. Too hyper here. I really like the song. And it is because there's a lot of stuff going on in it. Also, as a jazz trumpet player, I got a little bit of a soft spot for the style. So, yeah, it's just very cool seeing. I mean, it's everything, right? Let me walk this back a little bit. One of the first things I talked about with this group after the first song was that I thought it was cool that I heard so many influences and that it brought a lot of it to a modern sound. Oh, you know what it reminds me of is the Nashville Chamber Orchestra. Is that what it was? Where they, I don't remember. We checked out the album of theirs last year, and their goal was to create classical music with an orchestra in a way that is more digestible to a modern audience. They wanted to bring classical music out of the stuffiness of, you know, you got to be you got to be a specific type of person to understand it. You got to go to school to get it, and to bring this to a mainstream modern audience. And I kind of feel like that's what's going on here, in a way, bringing all these folk sounds to a modern light. Anyways, though, this idea of smashing stuff together, making something new out of several pieces of something old, I enjoyed kind of at arm's reach. It's not sounds I typically listen to on my own. It's folk music from cultures I haven't really spent a lot of time with. I appreciated it because of what it was by definition, not really through a feeling of it, but they just brought this whole idea to jazz, which I get. I am here for that. And to hear a genre that is very much well stuck in the past. I mean, if you go out gigging as a jazz performer, do you know what you have to do? You have to memorize all the old songs. They're called standards. And when you go to play, you're going to be playing standards 90% of the time. It is a genre of music that, at least in a vast majority of the live performance world, is stuck in the past. And it's so cool to listen to a group like this play something that feels a lot closer to traditional jazz than what a lot of modern jazz players are doing to bring jazz into the mainstream. But they're doing it in a way that also merges in a lot of sounds that I've never heard with jazz and I never thought I would hear with jazz. And it works in a way that is entirely complementary. This, this might not even be hyperbole. This blows my mind. That is hyperbole because that my mind is still intact. But no, it's very surprising, but it's delightful in every way. They absolutely nail every element that's familiar to me and blend it seamlessly with elements that are less familiar in a way that it's obvious on the surface. It's a collection of all these sounds, but also is quite fresh and new, and I want more of that. I'm not expecting more songs like this on the album. I'm sure they have a lot more tricks up their sleeve. But yeah, I will take more of this, especially I think is a bit refreshing coming off of track 4, which was a bit more one note. It reminded me of the first track. It has some nice ideas to it, beautiful melody writing. I enjoyed track number 4, but it didn't really quite click with me on a casual level, and on a critical level, I didn't really have anything new to bring up. I wrote one thing or two things down that I will talk about, but coming off of that, I was like, okay, this might be what I'm in store for. I'm kind of concerned about the future of this video, given that I don't really have much to say about this track. And then Karagouna comes in and just, wow. Let me talk about this a little, because I like talk about it in general. Let's dig into this. Drumming. This is where a lot of the jazz ideas come from. It is very cymbal heavy, light on the bass kick and the snare. This is a staple of jazz drumming. There's also a lot of heavy use of syncopated ride cymbal ideas, which is fast swing. That's where it goes. The bass, walking bass line, every single moment, 100%. Ornamental wind section stabs here and there. You got your vocal line does a thing. The instruments come in for like 2 or 3 notes to punctuate things. Your vocalist comes back in. This is just like big band music 101 right here. And to hear all of this being presented, like as far as the composition of when things play what, 100% jazz. But when we look at the notes that are being played, no, there's some really spicy ideas in here. Things that I think work well within a jazz space. We do have a couple of things that kind of move into some really tense concepts. Not as tense as like, metal tends to go as far as harmony, but we do introduce a lot of dissonance into some of these chord progressions that we haven't really heard elsewhere in the album. And I love these moments. They add a little bit of darkness, a little bit of tension, of danger to the songs that I really don't think has been present at all on the album. It's a really nice contrast, a nice diversion from some of the brighter, happier sounds that I've heard. It also, though, brings in a little bit of that spice that jazz is known for, but again, I don't think the spice is jazzy. I'm pretty sure some of these harmonic elements that add a bit of dissonance and darkness to our chord progressions are pulling from some of the folk music from one of these cultures, or maybe all of these cultures. Again, as the chord progressions are very foreign to me. I don't understand them. And it could very well be that they're mixing progressions from various cultures and creating unique chord progressions, which would be very cool. And that would also explain why some of this stuff I have no legend for. It's I want to just say this right here because I feel like I might end up saying this a lot, but I want to punctuate. This album is exciting. It really is. Every track comes in and does something that I'm not familiar with, but I kind of have little notes of elements where I'm like, okay, I see what that is. I just don't understand the larger picture of it. Um, and I find that to be very exciting. Just as a personal listening experience, like the whole concept around it, the whole thing of smashing all these disparate parts together and putting it within a modern framework, that is well within itself exciting. Even just on paper, I think that's a very cool concept. But while I'm listening to this album, all I can keep thinking is, I don't get this. And that's very cool. We have a lot of videos on this channel where I listen to something, I tell you, hey, this is probably what they meant by it. This is what I get out of it. The lyrics back me up. The music feels like this to me. It all comes together. I'm pretty certain that's what this song's about. And I listen to this album and I just keep walking away. Dude, this was cool, and this was cool, and that was cool, and I have no idea what any of that means, but I'm enjoying listening to it. And that doesn't happen too often. And it certainly is a reminder that I need to check out more music from these cultures. I know there are a couple of people in the community who continue to push me in that direction, and I thank you. I know it must be frustrating. We get a couple of cool artists on here. I'm like, dude, I need to listen to more of this. And I just, I don't have time to listen to everything that I need to listen to. Um, but I do know that this area of music, Middle Eastern, Indian, even some Eastern European stuff, especially folk music from these regions, I need to start introducing into my what would you call it? My musical vocabulary, my musical listening list. Um, and I'm just really enjoying this album. Maybe it wouldn't be so perplexing if I was more familiar with things. Maybe it still would be, given the eclectic elements that are the basis and foundation of the project. But it's exciting to me right now, regardless, because I just don't have any context for it. And it's a joy to listen to. Um, I do want to talk about something real quick that's related to rhythm. Almost every single passage in here for the first, I'll give it basically the first half of this album, or 5 tracks out of 11, 4/4. There have been no odd time signatures throughout any of this. That's not a bad thing at all. It's not usually something I bring up. If a song's in 4/4, time signature is just not a topic to discuss. But I think it's important here because we are working within folk music and putting it into a pop lens. A lot of that is going to point towards 4/4, but what they do with that is the groove, the infectiousness of the groove, and ensuring that every song has a unique rhythmic component to it, so that even though everything can be counted in 4/4, not every song feels rhythmically identical, and I think that's really important. Um, Not all artists do this. Sometimes an artist is just going to stick with 4 on the floor all the time. I personally find that a bit boring. There's definitely ways to spice it up, but for what it's worth, I really enjoy what they're doing here, dressing up the 4/4 in a variety of different ways where every song kind of has an interesting vibe to it. With Karagouna, really going for the syncopated idea on the drums while having that consistent walking bass line from the bass guitar. On the other idea of rhythms, though, is that there is a repetition of rhythms in melody lines. And the more that I think about this, I have no idea where it stems from. I kind of hear elements of this in what I think of folk music from some of these regions, but I don't have enough experience to say that it is a core element of the melodic writing for some of these groups. But when I listen to some of the lines, not in Karagouna, because again, that kind of borrows rhythmically more from jazz, but especially track 4, there's these sections where the violin and usually I think the oud will be playing a melody together, and it's just a series of like 26 or 28th notes. Same distance or same length of notes, same distance between notes, just back to back to back to back. It's just this very static rhythm. The melody is moving, the pitch is moving all over the place. It's just static rhythm. Retroactively thinking about some of the other tracks, it's in there too. Now, it's not exclusive. There are some really cool rhythmic ideas that show up from time to time, but it is this balancing act between these two sides of the rhythmic coin, where we have syncopation and static rhythms. And we do hear both of them from the lead melodies. I think that's a very nice way of introducing some contrast that I didn't pick up on earlier in the album, that I'm certainly seeing more of here. I'm going to see if I can find some lyrics for these tracks. I know Karagouna had lyrics. I don't remember if track 4 did. And then we'll keep going. Alright. I couldn't find any lyrics for Karagouna, but I did find out that it is a Greek folk song. And I did find a couple versions of it as far as lyrics go. So I don't know which one would necessarily be for this one. In fact, even thinking about a couple of the other tracks we've done lyrics for, I don't even know if they're accurate to what were being said in the song. Simply that I found folk tracks that lined up with what the titles were. I did find one piece of information, though, that Loxandra Ensemble has, in their previous 2 albums, I believe only done folk covers. In Transition marks a transition where they include some of their original tracks. Now, I haven't found any information about which tracks are original and which are covers. Can we call them probably reimaginations, right? In the classical world, we would call them arrangements, taking something originally and altering it to fit a new set of instruments or a new vibe or something like that. And you know, if this version of Karagouna is a cover of the old folk style, something tells me the old folk style is not a jazzy, loungy kind of vibe. So it's very cool that they're not just modernizing the sound in general, but they're also applying some of this older music to styles that weren't even probably around at the time that the songs were originally written. So I think that's pretty cool. And that probably ends any of the moments where I come back looking for lyrics and say, "Oh, I found this neat little detail." Because there's actually very little information about this group on the internet. When you type in Loxandra Ensemble, you really don't get a lot of hits. Unfortunately, their website, which they do have, loxandra.gr, just displays a white page with the word error on it, so I'm not sure what's up with that. That might change by the time you watch this, but I can't get to that, which I assume probably has some pretty good information on it, and might even have some of the percussion instruments. So let's keep pushing forward. We're going to move to the next track called Mikropolis. I really can't wait to see how this expands, because this is a solid groove. Okay. Very interesting technique where they're kind of emulating some trumpet style timbre characteristics. It's definitely the violin, but for a moment I was like, ooh, a trumpet? More of those slides. There's a full drum kit in here, isn't there? Bring this intensity down. Let's bring it in. Let the oud take over for a little bit. Dude, this transition moving into this is a very natural. Yeah, so a really cool bit of slow burn right there, bringing us to this peak that's going to act as the outro for this track. Simply because I don't want to forget it, and because it's going to be fresh in all of our minds. I'm curious where the inspiration for all of this comes from. So, like the slow burn that we had, slowly adding layers, bringing the volume up over time, leading to the peak of having everything present while retaining that same foundation. This is found in a lot of music. Now, given what the channel tends to focus on, which is rock and metal adjacent, post-rock comes to mind. That is the type of composition we find most prominently in that. And I just kind of took that as a parallel. Oh, this is like post-rock. People who listen to post-rock reactions on this channel, who might not necessarily typically listen to Loxandra Ensemble, might enjoy this song. It features a lot of compositional techniques that they enjoy. And then we finish the track off with something really close to a metal idea. And that begins to feel less like a coincidence, less like a parallel to me. And of course, this could also just be something that is represented in other influences that they have. And it could be my narrow mindedness about this. Again, a lot of the influences I've heard on this album, I only know the tip of the iceberg about. They're things that I have such a shallow understanding of to begin with. But yeah, I think it's why that ending comes out of nowhere, and I'm really curious what their influence was, what their inspiration was for creating that. If maybe there is something in these cultural folk musics that this could have stemmed from, or if they have been influenced by more modern works, much like with Karagouna, having that jazz influence to it. It's just, I really wasn't expecting that. And it was just kind of a wild turn. Speaking of that post-rock section, the slow burn in the middle of this track, I thought it was really genius, right? So moving into it, we had, I think it was the violin. Yeah, I think it was the violin had started to play some ideas that were bringing everything down, kind of relaxing the environment. Everything else sort of just abruptly ends, but the violin gave us a little bit of this smoother transition into this quieter solo section, pretty much just rhythm in here. And I think it was the oud comes in and just starts soloing. I really like the solos that were presented here. Something I haven't really talked about much in this album is that when the instruments take a lead melody line, that there's a specific way. There's a few different ways. I wonder what the composition credits look like on this album, because when I listen to the way melodies are crafted, there are different touches to this, different characteristics that shine through, and I wonder if maybe even if they aren't improvised on the spot in the studio, maybe though each person is still writing their own solos, their own lead melodies, because there are a lot of nuance between them, and they tend to stick to an instrument. The way that the oud plays a melody is very different than the way violins play melodies. Not violins, the violin player plays their melodies. And so it creates these distinct voices as far as the melody is written. I like the way the oud writes theirs. there is usually quite a bit of frantic energy to it. Even in calmer, quieter sections, the oud player likes to play fast. And it's not that it's always fast. It's not like metal shred, where it's just constantly at the same level. It's just that the oud player, when they get going, they get going. And they like to keep this energy up. Now, it isn't that they stay at this energy. Sometimes they bring it back down. They'll explore a little bit of things. And despite being a string instrument where they could play infinitely until their muscles get tired, they still introduce rest. Spaces where they don't play at all. Moments for their last idea to hang and resonate and for us to digest them before they move on to their next concept. And I really love just the pacing and flow that was present on this track's oud solo. At the very end of it, though, the oud ends the solo with a couple of rhythmic ideas that become the basis of the next section. Really beautiful way of intertwining a lead melody line into the foundational workings of the next section, and it transitions us between those ideas very fluidly. And then from here, we just start building up new layers every few bars, raising the volume over the course of it, just really increasing the intensity of the section until we hit that peak. And we have all the instruments there and the volume's maxed out. It was a good slow burn. And I'm not a big fan of slow burns. They have to be executed well. And I think just let me take that back. The short time frame of this certainly helps with that as well. Usually when we look at post-rock, the slow burns will be like 5 minutes of a 7 or 8 minute song. And here the slow burn was about 90 seconds worth, maybe not even that. But it was just a really nice layering up of ideas so we could feel this environment and then feel how this new instrument changed that environment and how this new one even changed it further. And I really appreciated the way that this whole section flowed. No words on this one. So let's push forward to the next track. That heavy vibrato is something we haven't really heard at all. And it's giving me very American Western vibes. That's exactly what they're going for. But again, it's like that's just a spice in the pot. It's not even the main flavor. This is clever. just the slightest amount of bluesier ideas in the guitar harmonies to continue to sort of push towards that, yeah, man. And then the uplift here. That's still a clarinet, right? I think it is. I've just never heard a clarinet blast, and it certainly sounds more like a sax than I would expect. Ooh, oh, what? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Rein it back in. Dude, those harmonics are clean too. Those higher pitched plucky sounds coming from the oud. Yeah, and they're so frequent within that riff that they were playing the whole time and just never missed a beat. That's just impressive. Chameleon like. I think that's kind of where I begin to see this band. Every song is very Loxandra Ensemble. Every song here has very much been them. It's a smorgasbord of a lot of sounds within a pop frame or a modern framework. But every song also has such a unique vibe to it. I think it's wild that the more I listen, the less timbre change I hear. Or let me reiterate that. The more timbre change I hear without instrumental changes. That might be where I wanted to go. For instance, that song, I swear that woodwind sounds like an alto saxophone. But according to the personnel list, no one plays the alto sax. And whenever the saxophone went into some lower notes, specifically with a lot less air pressure, it really began to pick up more of the typical characteristics of a clarinet sound. So I really think that they're doing some cool stuff with airflow and projection and, in trumpet's term, blasting. Really putting a lot of air through the instrument to where it comes out the other side with a little bit of distortion in a way that sounds to me like it's not made out of wood but out of metal. like a saxophone. And I didn't know clarinets could do that. Maybe it's not a normal clarinet. Maybe it's a soprano clarinet. No, I'm trying to. Maybe it is a traditional clarinet. Maybe it's also not a Western clarinet though, which could also influence things. I don't know. It just says the word clarinet, which honestly, there's a lot of them. So that could be. It's like if something says it's a sax player. Well, yeah, there's like 7 saxophones in just the Western world. Actually, um, that's a bad example because saxophone is a modern Western instrument. But I hope you get my meaning on that. Like if it says guitar, like there's a lot of guitar. The oud is technically a guitar. The lute is a guitar. And it just says clarinet. That could be a lot of things. And it could be that there is a type of clarinet that has saxophone qualities to it at times. Um, but yeah, like the oud right here sounds like a typical American acoustic guitar, right? There's obviously some changes, and I'm sure that there's a lot of tuning elements that went into this to ensure that it felt this specific way. Um, because there are harmonic qualities that the oud are not is not carrying over from some of the other tracks. So this is, I would wager, is a song that the player needs to either have a second instrument or has to tune this one between tracks in order to perform this one. But yeah, like the way that they do bends and slides does not feel like the bends and slides we've heard on other tracks. They feel distinctly Western. Um, and it's kind of bizarre how much of a chameleon the oud is, just like with the clarinet. I think the last instrument I want to talk about in this context is the vocalist. I don't know if anyone had been thinking about this, but on this track specifically, there was specific ways that she was delivering her vocals. Just a little bit of airiness at times. Just changing up placement. Just changing up a little bit of the emotional push through resonance of it. Kind of sounded country like at times. Without the drawl, which I think is a really interesting thing as somebody who's listened to a lot of country in his life. But yeah, the vocal is thinking back to Karagouna and the opening track. The vocalist is different on almost every one of these songs. She has the same vocal range and usually the same type of syllabic inflection, but the way that she projects her voice, the placement of it, the width and body and fullness of it is different every time. And she seems to be able to embody all of these different types of music, whether it's pop or lounge or even at the first track, still to me sounds like it has a lot of traditional Indian influence to it as far as the vocal lines go. And it's just like, how do these people take a handful of instruments and make them fit in so many different styles of music? It just kind of blows my mind. Which honestly brings me to another point here is there are a lot of different influences here. Yeah, Bryan, you've been talking about this all day. Like, what's your point now? No, like for real though, think about it. All of these different types of music have different rules to them. They all have different characteristics to them. They all do things differently. Whoever is composing, whether it is a full group thing or they have one main composer, they have a vast knowledge of a lot of different musical types, what makes them tick, how they work, and most importantly, if you put them all into a Venn diagram of like 7 circles, where do they all meet? And I think that's the most impressive part of all of this. Because to understand a genre fully enough to make music within it is already a pretty big undertaking. to understand two genres, to clash them together and make something that is hopefully enjoyable to people of both styles is even more difficult. And these people are pulling together folk music from multiple eras, from multiple cultures, finding the through line between all of them where we can combine them in a way that is congruent and harmonious, and then saying we still need to make this palatable for a modern audience and twisting it and manipulating it until it sounds modern. I don't know. And then mixing it with stuff like blues and country and the lounge and jazz. Like, I don't know. The more I'm thinking about this, the less I think I would have any chance at making anything that sounds as good as this. It's just, it requires way too much knowledge from way too many different disciplines of music. I've smashed together 2, 3 different genres, 4 maybe tops, but like the 6 or 7 that they're doing from different cultures, even, like, I don't know, it just blows my mind. There is a musical genius, at least one, maybe more, in this group, and it is just phenomenal for me to listen to this and hear everything just work. And yet, again, none of the final product muddies over the influences. It's very easy to still hear, oh, this is from, this type of music, or this is very much from this type of music, or this foundation comes from this genre of music. It's not this homogenous new sound. It's still piecemeal of a bunch of other ideas, but it is kind of this homogenous new sound. And I don't know, man. Genius. I think that's just the best way I can describe it. Let me see if I can find some lyrics for this one. Well, unfortunately, again, I couldn't find any lyrics for this one, so we're going to continue on through this album looking at the next track here. I will say, though, I think these 3 songs back to back, tracks 5, 6, and 7, are certainly my favorite part of the album, and I'm interested to see how they wrap this album up as we move into the final third of it. And we see what they do as they try to hopefully end the album on a pretty high note. Let's dive into it. There's a lot of really cool rhythmic ideas, especially on the left side here, that sound like they're using finger rolls to get a lot of accented hits really close together. It's interesting, listen to all the variation on this single melody line. We had it passed around between timbres, but we also had some rhythmic variations on it from time to time as well, as it evolved into an idea over the course of that whole thing. Yeah, and this returns to some of the Indian influence we saw in that opening track. A static foundation with lots of room for the lead instrument to express themselves over. Yeah, it's a fun little track there. I think I just find it really interesting whenever the bass leads a song like that. It's very uncharacteristic for many of these genres simply because they didn't have an electric bass in much of this folk music. We're bringing back that reggae offbeat muted lutes thing. It's interesting pairing a little bit of this laid-back feeling with this upbeat tempo and high energy melody lines. Dude, the drum kit work on this is wild too. Like, there's some really fun hi-hat work happening on there. This is a much chiller melody line for this.
Γιατί θες να φύγεις που θα πας, αφού σ' αγαπώ και μ' αγαπάς. Γιατί θες να φύγεις που θα πας, αφού σ' αγαπώ και μ' αγαπάς. Γιατί θες να φύγεις που θα πας, αφού σ' αγαπώ και μ' αγαπάς. Γιατί θες να φύγεις που θα πας, αφού σ' αγαπώ και μ' αγαπάς. Γιατί θες να φύγεις.
I am noticing something very interesting about the way melodies are written. That was also an interesting ending. A lot of their songs just end. You have your song, and then we have the final bar or two that provides us our harmonic resolution, and then the song's over. There's just not a lot of ending styles other than that. We did have that big rock ending at the end of, was it Mikropolis? But yeah, otherwise it's all of these, just nice, tidy, put a bow on top of the chord progression and call it a day. Having this like 40-second fade out is very different from them, and once again just shows the experimentation of the group. They're not ever happy doing the same thing all the time. There always has to be something different about it. And I really appreciate that. I was a little concerned at the beginning of this album. I think I expressed this, that I didn't know if I was going to be down casually to enjoy this entire album, if it was all going to be like the opening track. And ever since I said that, the album continues to surprise me. Or I should say, the band, not the album. The album is the product. That's all their work made physical. No, the band continues to surprise me. Every song takes me somewhere new, somewhere different than I thought they would. Not necessarily that they would be able to, but that they would be able to within their voice, within their style. And yeah, every song is just a surprise. And it continues to be. Track 8, we kind of went back to that Indian style that we explored in tracks 4 and 1. It's another one of those songs that I think is very well done, is beautiful to listen to, but I don't really have a lot to add on to it. I've already said about some of those earlier tracks, but then we get to track 9, and it's a reggae song. And like, we already introduced a reggae component somewhere in one of the other songs. I don't remember which track it was, but I was like, wait a second, we got this offbeat, palm muted thing going on the oud. It kind of feels very reggae. And here we have it again. It's kind of bonkers. But again, here it's presented in a way that's a little... it works against what everything else is doing. There's this chill, laid-back feeling in the percussion in the oud, and then like the qanun and violin and clarinet have these really fast-moving concepts that are very energetic, and at least to me kind of contrast with the laid backness of some of the other elements of the song. And it's a really interesting combination of feelings and vibes coming from the different styles of composition in here. So all that's just like, yeah, again, I keep getting surprised by them. There's nothing I think that they can't do at this point. And with 2 songs to go, the last thing I'm thinking is, oh, I've already heard everything this album has to offer. I know that these 2 tracks, at least one of them, because the last track, it's going to wrap up the album, right? So I'm kind of thinking it's going to be a bit more conservative in its musical ideas, and we'll probably return to some of those Middle Eastern or Indian stuff ideas, much like tracks 8 and 4 and 1. I think we're going to return back to that. But track 10 is called Balkan Salsa. And I can't help but think, I had this inkling of an idea earlier in this album, like, hey, there's some Latin things going on in here. No, I think this kind of cements it. There's definitely some Latin influences on this album, and that song in particular will lean heavily into them. I was talking about melody writing, something I've been picking up on, and I can't believe I haven't noticed it until now, is that they're incredibly complex and dense as far as the number of notes. I feel like in a lot of, especially mainstream Western music, melodies tend to be simpler. Not just easier to understand or easier to write, but just it feels like the norm. Even going back, decades or years in Western music, decades or centuries is what I meant to say. Yeah, go back a few years, things were still simple back then. No, even go back decades or centuries, and you'll still find music, melody line specifically, is a bit on the simpler side. Right? Maybe simple's not the right word. It's not flourishy, I think is the word I want to go for. I don't know the proper antonym for flourish, so it's not flourishy. But the melody lines in here are flourishy. They'll take something that's just like 6 notes and then do like and like put all these like intricate movements between the notes. So many little flurries, and trills, and slurs and slides, and it's like you have this simple melody. Like if we just look at the key notes, it's just like bum 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 bum, just like a really simple melody, and it'll take them like they'll just the notes, their pitch will just be like flittering all over the place. You hear this a lot on the violin and the clarinet. Those are the 2 that I hear it most on. But even the qanun can do stuff that's like this as well, and it's very flourishy. It's very ornamental. It almost feels at times as if it's not so much about those key notes, which in Western music theory that's really what you want to focus on. It almost feels like the flourish is the melody. It's a really interesting inversion of composition. Where was I going with this? Oh, yeah. And even when we don't have super complex things, like the ending of that track, during the fade out, the clarinet is absolutely going off. The key melody in there is not that complex, but that clarinet is going all over the place. And it's not a series of, I mean, it is technically a series of faster notes, but the fact that everything is sort of slurred or bended or slid into, we get all the micro adjustments between the notes rather than just hitting the 2 notes separately, and that just creates a flurry sound. It all feels amorphous. It doesn't feel like we're playing specific notes as much as we're just sliding between pitches. It's a very different type of melody writing that feels a bit more loose, I'd say, harmonically. But even when we aren't doing all that flourishy stuff, one thing I've picked up a lot is the violin likes to do these slides into the target note. That's another one of these little bits of flourish. they're just, it almost feels like a lot of the melody writing in here has to have a lot of movement to it. And I find that really fascinating. I don't know what culture, or maybe it's a bunch of cultures coming together, or maybe it's just the composer for Loxandra Ensemble and they really like movement within their melody writing. And so they take folk melodies and then just embellish them up and beef them up and add all the stuff to it, in order to create the highly complex writing that we get in here. I'm not sure where it comes from, but it's certainly something that I'm noticing, is that there really are no simple melodies on this album. And I think it'd be really difficult to transcribe, at least in Western notation, because I would just be drawing slur lines between everything, and just, I don't know. It would just, it would be, and I don't even know that it would get the desired effect. I don't know how to explain that. The slurs aren't like direct slurs. There's micro things in there. I don't know. I find it fascinating though, as with everything else. This has just been a really eye-opening album, as it's introducing me to a lot. This is a crash course in like Eastern European and Middle Eastern folk music. Just giving me a little bit of a lot of things and saying, hey, good luck figuring out where all the pieces come from, but you got a big puzzle here and you put it together and it sounds good. That metaphor fell apart. Let me see if I can find some lyrics for this. Alright, so track 9 appears to be another folk song. It does have lyrics, however, the only place I found them did not allow me to highlight the text so I could copy it and put it into a translator, and they did not provide a translation themselves. So, I don't know. It does introduce an interesting question to this, though. Usually, the reason we do lyrical dives is to see if we can figure out any themes that are being delivered through the lyrics, because we speak language, so ideas come across a lot more clearer than in the music. Music is like a second language to me. I'm pretty good at deciphering it, but words are really clear to me when they're said clearly. Metaphor and simile, and there's lots of ways to hide your meaning in ways that are going to go over my head. But the idea is usually because it is all part of the creative process, right? Your musicians are making the music, your vocalist or lyricist is making the lyrics, and hopefully everybody's on the same page and they're delivering a unified result throughout all of this. And everything is hopefully working together to achieve their vision. With many of these songs from Loxandra Ensemble, the lyrics were written decades ago. They're old folk songs. So there isn't so much of a synergy there. What I find interesting in the 2 times I think we've actually had lyrics that I've been able to get translated is that the people writing these songs have heard these lyrics, presumably played against music, and said, well, I'd like to do that differently. And that doesn't always mean better. And I just want to focus on that real quick, because one of the things I think about a lot when it comes to covers is that I would not be comfortable doing a cover unless I felt that I would be improving the song in some way. Maybe there is an element of the lyrics that isn't quite represented in the music as much as I think it could be, and I want to write music that better fits the lyrics, that kind of vibe. When we did Covers Week, late last year, I think it was, that was one of the things that I focused on. Some of those covers felt like they were just, let's use their lyrics and our style of music, and that's what we got. I don't really think it made those songs better, but it was certainly that band's version of that song. But there were some tracks where I think that the cover ended up being better. And it was usually because I felt a stronger synergy between the lyrics and the words. And I wonder if that happens in here at all. Like I mentioned, I don't know any original version of Karagouna. So I have nothing to compare it against. I'm pretty sure the original wasn't a loungy jazz track, though. But I am curious how the themes of that song, because I think that was one of the ones I couldn't get any lyrics to, how the themes of that song lyrically mix with this idea of a loungy jazz setting. Is that just a cool thing to do? Or did they feel that there was something better to be explored by putting those lyrics to this atmosphere? And unfortunately, as much as I'd love to do that, especially now that I'm sure most of all of the songs in here that have lyrics are covers, that's something I wish I could have explored more. And unfortunately, it would just take a lot more work. I'd have to go and find probably a couple versions of each of these songs as they were originally performed, trying to find the through point between all of them, trying to find that original folk version, which is kind of contradictory to the idea of folk music, which is more of a word of mouth, expands and grows and changes over time kind of thing. And then compare that to their rendition of it, and I'd have to get lyrics for all of them, which is something I also am having some problems with. I think it's just outside of the scope of this video today, at least, unfortunately. But I do think it is a very interesting aspect of something like this. I don't know that I've heard any album that does anything like this. Not even just the experimental side of merging so many cultures together, but the concept of taking old folk music and remaking it for a modern day audience. We have definitely heard music inspired by old folk ideas and composition, but I don't think we've heard covers of old folk music, which is, like I said, it's unique. I think it brings this extra element to it, and I really wish we could explore that side of the process. So let's wrap this up. We have 2 more songs ahead of us. Looking forward to both of them. One's a salsa, I hope, which is just really fun. And the other is the album closer, which is, I don't know, I love album closers, man. I've known people who are like, the last song on most albums is not great. I'm like, I don't know if other people feel that way. I am a huge fan. I went real, so I am a real fan. I'm a real big fan of album closers. Even if they aren't great ways to end an album, they tend to be some more the eclectic side. I don't know if it's because artists figure most people aren't getting to the end of an album. Maybe they just figure most people only listen to singles. I don't know. But album closers tend to be a little bit more experimental in my experience. Not a lot, but just, we just wrote an hour's worth of music on this style. We just want to change things up a little bit. That's what closers feel like to me. So I'm always excited to get to the last song of an album and see what they're doing with that. With all that said, let's dive into Balkan Salsa. Okay, I'm already sold. This is good. Yeah, that bass walk. Oh! Okay, this legit might be my new favorite track off this album. It is a real close call. Dude, it is wild how many songs on this album make me want to move not just my head or my body, but like full body, hips, everything's got to be moving. Dude, those little, like, I don't know, 16th note additions in the violin. That's a fun little idea. This is a much more straightforward melodic style than we've heard anywhere else in this album. I wonder if it's particularly to match the Latin style of melody writing. This is a really interesting idea here. Taking salsa and making an improvisational solo section out of a salsa foundation. I don't know that it entirely works because the violin line is just a hair bit too moving for foundation, but it's a neat idea. Yeah, we haven't had any drum solos at all. Dude, that polyrhythm. Dude, triplets and salsa sound weird. There is a lot going on. Bringing back the A section to wrap the song up. Oh. This is the type of layered synergy I'm digging. That walk down from earlier. Yeah, that is. I think that's the big highlight of the song, of the album. And it certainly works as the peak. This is going to be our denouement. This is going to take us out to the ending.
Άιντε μου βάλες μαραζί και τερτιστικά για και τερτιστικά καρδιά. Στα Γιάννενα θα πάω, στα Γιάννενα θα πάω, στα Γιάννενα θα πάω, στα πόδια τσιβικά, στα πόδια τσιβικά.
See, lots of movement on these melody lines.
Μπορεί να βάψω τα μαλλιά μου, να βάψω τα μαλλιά μου. Μπορεί να βάψω τα μαλλιά μου, τα σεβδαλίδικα, τα σεβδαλίδικα.
A crescendo right up to the ends. Not crescendo, accelerando. Yeah, that's another interesting ending. Just abruptly stops. Yes, I had that called right. They went for simpler and a return to form to wrap the album up. And certainly after listening to Balkan Salsa, that was the peak of the album. Everything rose to that. That was the most exciting part. And everything after that has to be winding down. And yeah, Milia certainly doesn't hit as hard as Balkan Salsa did, but I think it does a fantastic job of wrapping up this album. Now, I do need to talk about this salsa. I greatly enjoyed it. But it also, I think it's one of those places where, let me put it this way. I think it's their most ambitious song on the album. And I strongly applaud them for attempting it. I don't think it quite worked, though. I think it was the one place where if you put the Venn diagram of all the styles together that were utilized there really wasn't a lot to work with. And so there were going to be some clashing elements, and that's what that song ended up feeling like. I don't think that the types of movement that we have from melodic and foundational ideas in salsa makes for really great foundational elements under a solo. It made the solo section feel busy and like our lead solo was competing with this background sound. After we got out of the solo section, which back up for a second, I do think the solo was beautiful, as always. The melody writing is great. I've talked about this so many times over the course of this video. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And the violin line, I think, did a really great job at being a lead melody while also embodying the concept of a salsa. Those two ideas, in and of themselves, were fine. Putting them together, though, is where I felt like parts of the song are beginning to clash. And coming out of that solo section when we had so many ideas, this was kind of hit and miss for me. There were certainly parts of it that I think kind of worked well. I don't know if it was a compositional thing that needed balance. Maybe it was a production thing. Maybe a little bit more spaciousness in all the voices would have helped. I honestly don't know. It was beginning to fall apart for me, though. It's just too much happening, which is wild because we've had some really heavy, dense layering on this album, and I've praised them for their ability to balance all of that with listenability. And so we get to this track, and it is their, it's their big moment. It's the final part of the album. It's peak layers, peak writing, and it just kind of it feels like they bit off a little bit more than they can chew. I still think it's a fantastic song and a wonderful way to wrap up the album before moving into the next track, which winds things down quite a bit. And the ending of it is phenomenal. And, one of the most important things about most art is the taste that they leave in your mouth, how you feel about it when you walk away. And for all of the issues I felt that it had in the the middle quarter of it, that's not accurate. The third quarter of it, those final minute and a half, 2 minutes, they did everything right there. The way everything wrapped up, the really fun ideas that pointed us towards the end of the song, even some of those cheekier rhythmic passing of the baton ideas, everyone coming together for this really unified staccato syncopated rhythm thing. Like there's a lot of stuff that works at the end that kind of makes me forget about that third section that just kind of started to fall apart a little bit. But it's not a perfect song, and I do feel like something could have happened in that section it just needs a little bit of glue to hold it all together. I think it feels like it wants to fall apart. And they recover from it, which I think is the important part. And I do walk away from the song really freaking enjoying it. So, a small bit of criticism out of an hour's worth of music, I don't think that's too bad. Yeah, I'm blown away by this. I don't have any thoughts about the final track. I'm glad this has been brought to my attention. I'm interested in checking out their other two albums. Are they also on Spotify? No. What? I know they have a Bandcamp. Maybe they're on Bandcamp. That seems like a shame because now I really want to listen to them. I enjoyed this quite a bit. And like I said, I'm glad this has been brought to my attention. It is certainly a blind spot I have in music in general, and I'd love to learn more about it. If anybody has insight into lyrics, how much of this is covers of folk songs, and I guess more importantly, which one of these are original compositions? Though I do believe that aside from lyrics, a lot of this is going to be close to original composition. I just kind of get the feeling that the mishmash of sounds we have on this album are not present or are not found in any of the older folk songs. They would have probably been a bit more homogenous in their influences and their musical composition styles. But yeah, are there any songs on here that, well, yeah, I guess also any songs that are lyrically original? I don't think there are, but that'd be pretty cool to learn about as well. I'm sure I had other questions in here. Percussion instruments, if you know which ones are played, please point that my direction. I'd love to read about that. Those are my thoughts. Loxandra Ensemble's In Transition. What did you think of this album? Was there anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you just have your own thoughts, opinions, and perspectives about it. Put all that stuff down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree that takes you to this menu. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for this. There is another album review. I've talked about it a couple times. We checked out Cardiacs. It released at the same time as this. If you're interested in that, go check it out. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to check out a lot of music. It's a live stream. Just come by, hang out. We have casual conversation, good music to listen to. We always get sidetracked and start talking about weird stuff. If you're like super nerdy, I feel like every other week we get stuck on language and how words work. I don't know why that conversation keeps popping up, but we get stuck on it and it sidetracks the music listening aspect. I was gonna say so often, but yeah, like too frequently. I don't get it. We just love words, I guess. Anyways, if you're not interested in a live stream, Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, I'll be back with some more reactions to stuff. That's what we do here. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.